Hello everybody, Ben Rogers here, the Raptors Digest. Ryker, the Anthony Davis rumors, news, trade news has just taken the league by storm, taken every basketball fan, Raptors fan. You know, there's rumors flying everywhere, and the Toronto Raptors are right in the middle of it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm sure everybody's been in tune to the latest podcast that there's, like we said, there's the possibility that they can be a real contender to land this superstar in Anthony Davis, but now we're getting, a day in, more information, and we are starting to see what it is that the Raptors are putting on the offer sheet.
Most definitely, the way things go with trade rumors and demands, how quickly things move, by the time this pod's uploaded, there might be more information, but the current reported proposal now that the Toronto Raptors have put out there is Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, DeLon Wright, and Jonas Valanciunas to the New Orleans Pelicans for Anthony Davis and Darius Miller. Now, you talked for a long time, 17-minute podcast on how Anthony Davis would be a phenomenal fit for the Toronto Raptors. But a move like this, trading 4 core rotation people, DeLon Wright, Pascal Siakam, OG, and even Jonas, they're all pretty young guys with a lot of potential, a lot of upside. What are your thoughts on just this specific reported move? It's apparently from a league source via Twitter, so what are your thoughts?
Well, I have 3 initial reactions to, I guess, this news, and of course you take it with a grain of salt because nobody knows. I mean, Woj is kind of the reliable source in NBA media when it comes to the rumors being as close to facts as possible. So you can't necessarily assume that everything that's reported is correct, but assuming that it is, right? My initial thoughts are we do have to go all in for Anthony Davis, right? Because we're unsure that Kawhi Leonard is going to re-sign. I already said in the latest podcast he purchased the real estate in Los Angeles, which doesn't necessarily mean anything, but there's this whole back and forth of the speculations of will he re-sign. Best possibility to get him to re-sign is to have postseason success. You bring in a superstar, that's giving you the best possible chance to have postseason success. Now to the point of you have 4 players that you're trading. You're getting rid of 4 roster guys, but if you look at what the starting lineup would be, Lowry, Green, Leonard, AD, Ibaka, that's a crazy lineup. Right off the bench, now you have Fred, Powell, and Monroe. Not the strongest bench unit, and you have a couple of questionable guys, but teams like the Rockets or the Thunder, the top teams in the West, not necessarily Golden State Warriors, but they play 8-man rotations. So that's not a bad lineup. And if everything tanks and Kawhi leaves, Anthony Davis is still on contract, you can trade him away for a lot of valuable pieces in the offseason. So it's really a win-win situation besides kind of doing more players dirty, so to say, and trading away guys that you really brought up through the system. But this is the time to do it. So maybe you have a different take on that, but I think that this is a really nice trade to offer because, and we'll talk about this in a second, we have a lot of teams that are willing, the same as the Raptors, to basically trade everyone except for their number 1 person.
Yeah, most definitely. You brought it up. The Toronto Raptors, we have Kawhi Leonard currently. He's an unknown for the future, but this season we have him. We're going all out for this season. When we made the trade for DeMar DeRozan for Kawhi Leonard, we said that we were going all in on this season, and hopefully it's enough to allow Kawhi to stay. And if we're going all in on this year, we have the opportunity to bring in a guy like Anthony Davis, you have to go for it. Pascal Siakam is a budding all-star. We don't know what his true potential is going to be, but he's only 1 year younger than Anthony Davis, and it's unarguable to compare Pascal Siakam and Anthony Davis right now. Anthony Davis is a much more established player. He probably has more upside to be improved upon, and he's just a guy that could really go down as one of the best players in league history if everything falls right. So to have Pascal Siakam leave would be tough, but if you're bringing in a guy like Anthony Davis, it's a necessary loss. OG Anunoby, he's a guy that struggled for the first half of the season, but another player that I love and has phenomenal upside for the Toronto Raptors, but you have to give up assets to bring in a transcendental
it's worth it.
player.
It's worth it to almost bring up this point now. I've been reading through the comments, and if we have time at the end of the podcast, we'll certainly mention a couple more. But one person is very adamant on laying off Pascal Siakam, saying he hasn't peaked yet. He has the ability, in 2 years, he will become a superstar in all capital letters. The potential is certainly there. But, again, the issue is he's not a player that's going to bring, not certainty that the Raptors will win a championship, but of course there's much more confidence in this Raptors team to make a very late playoff push with Anthony Davis rather than Pascal Siakam currently. Right now. And even if you lost a player who has this potential, this amazing, tremendous upside like Pascal Siakam, you still have Anthony Davis who will be just as hot in the offseason that you can trade away and get guys just as valuable back. So it makes perfect sense to get rid of him. Yeah, so I agree with what you're saying. These guys, it would be tough to lose. It would be a tough pill to swallow, but just all the upside that Anthony Davis would bring, it makes sense to just put everything on the table and go for it.
Most definitely. And people have mentioned, you mentioned it earlier in the podcast, how we would lose a lot of depth. The bench unit, with this current trade proposal, we'd still have Fred, Norm, CJ, Chris Boucher, and Greg Monroe off the bench. Obviously, CJ and Chris Boucher aren't solidified NBA players right now. CJ's kind of been back and forth as an NBA guy this season, and Chris Boucher is just coming fresh out of the G League. So there's some question marks on the bench there. But in this proposed trade, we also bring a guy named Darius Miller, who's, you look at his stats, he's a pretty solid player for the New Orleans Pelicans. He shoots close to 40% from the three-point line. The Raptors have been looking for shooters. We've struggled from the three-point line all season. And in the same vein, Danny Green came along with Kawhi Leonard. Bringing another role player from New Orleans along with Anthony Davis could also be a huge impact if we have such a depleted bench. Yeah,
absolutely. This is not really the most relevant fact, but if we look at to have this lesser known player, certainly for the Raptors fans, but we can't understate the impact of the Danny Green and the Kawhi Leonard trade, right? He's been a player that a lot of people said, he's just a throw-in piece. But really, he's had substantial impact. Same could go for acquiring a guy like Darius Miller. But of course, it's even more speculative because there would have to be a counter offer, and this whole trade scenario would have to be entertained by the Pelicans. We don't know what they're wanting to get rid of and what they think is a fair value for giving up Anthony Davis. So, I don't want to speculate on that too much, but it could have an extra impact to bolster a bench that would be certainly depleted.
Yeah, are there any other players on the New Orleans Pelicans that you look at and you'd say that you'd like to bring back in an Anthony Davis trade? Maybe not necessarily have the greatest value, but you think could play a rotation role?
Certainly.
For the Toronto Raptors?
For me, it would have to be a guy on a small contract. Mm-hmm. We already have an ex-champion Golden State Warrior player on the team in Patrick McCaw, but Ian Clark, he had a really solid run for the Golden State Warriors when he was on there. He served his minutes well. And another player that I wouldn't mind getting back, he hasn't been tremendous, but he was a player that I've been watching in the NBA, is Tim Frazier on just a one-year contract, $1.5 million. But I think he would be another guy in the same conversation that we had a while ago when we were talking about wanting to maybe change up the backup point guard position and get some different offensive abilities. So he's a guy that perhaps, but I would be willing to get rid of 4 players in cash or 4 players on the pick just for Anthony Davis, to be honest with you.
Yeah, most definitely. Anthony Davis is the key centerpiece of this. Obviously, the Pelicans have some other players that maybe would be intriguing to bring back. It's all dependent on how these negotiations go, what they're looking for. And the main team that has been talked about in the news media, obviously the Raptors were put as the heads of the odds, Vegas betting odds, similar in the same vein that Kawhi Leonard was. But the Lakers are a team that's consistently been put in the trade scenarios for these superstars. And I want to throw a question at you. Do you think the Toronto Raptors can throw out a better offer than the Los Angeles Lakers?
Yeah, it's a really good point to bring up because this is everybody's assumption right now. Everybody. Mm-hmm. Popular media is really promoting the fact that they've basically are considering this a done deal that Anthony Davis will go to the Los Angeles Lakers. They say he has, obviously he has LeBron's agent now. He's been very vocal with what he wants to play for. It does seem to be the top pick. It doesn't really make sense for me from the Lakers side to give up their 3 next best pieces because they don't have a good team. LeBron's been sitting. They've lost almost every game, right? They don't have a good team without LeBron, and now you give your next three best, and now you're left with just scraps. Sure, you're adding in Anthony Davis, but I mean, I'm very critical of the Los Angeles Lakers team, but it is a very solid three players to get back. But this is the point, and if we've seen it now, and like I mentioned earlier, Woj has the most reliable information when he reports it. And speaking today with Stephen A. He mentioned in this talk between Lakers and Celtics, the ones that the media is hyping up, he said there's teams that he's heard are willing to make big offers to treat Anthony Davis as a rental to make the push for the championship this season. And if that doesn't sound like the Toronto Raptors without him saying it's the Toronto Raptors that are making this big push, and he was implying that he thinks that they're a very likely team to get in the mix and to actually have perhaps a leg up, I think it's a very convincible thing to think that these guys have the upside. And there's a lot of people that are also critical of Lonzo Ball and Brandon Ingram. Brandon Ingram has been on a huge decline. Kyle Kuzma is really the number one piece in that pick there, in that trade deal.
Yep, most definitely. I personally, now, obviously we watch the Raptors a lot more, and most of our young guys have been inconsistent, but I think the players that we have, Pascal Siakam's the centerpiece in the same vein. Kyle Kuzma would be for the Lakers, but I really like our young core more than the Lakers.
Well, Pascal, if you just compare the 1-1, the Pascal Siakam and Kyle Kuzma is better right now, a more finessed scorer, but Pascal Siakam, most improved player, most likely, and more upside for sure, more potential. And they're both power forwards, so they be getting the same position back.
Yeah, and I'd argue Pascal Siakam's more valuable right now, even though he doesn't score as much. But that could be a debate put aside. I like the upside of our young pieces, but it's all dependent on how the Pelicans and how the rest of the league sees it, because they have a lot of upside. Even guys like Fred, Norm, OG, but they've been inconsistent. Yeah. And the inconsistencies is one of the issues that might be a roadblock in completing this trade. But regardless, assuming that this deal is enough to get it done. Yeah. And Anthony Davis comes into the Toronto Raptors. One thing that I think should really force the Toronto Raptors to push all their chips in and make this deal if it's possible is I believe that Anthony Davis, they have a better chance of retaining Anthony Davis than they do Kawhi Leonard. And that might be a hot take and all that sort of stuff. But Anthony Davis, there's been no direct quotes. Woj hasn't come out. No one has said. It's all been speculation that it's the Lakers, the Lakers, the Lakers. And that's because of LeBron's agent. But the thing that has been definitively said is that Anthony Davis wants to play for a contender. He's frustrated with the New Orleans Pelicans and how they've struggled to put talent around him. And unfortunately, that roster has just been plagued with injuries. And they've had some decent teams. But nonetheless, they've just had some bad rosters around Anthony Davis, injuries included. So I think if we bring in Anthony Davis into a winning culture, because Kawhi is kind of unpredictable. He's almost, you're not sure what's really going on through Kawhi's mind, but I believe Anthony Davis just wants to win. And if we make a phenomenal playoff push this year and maybe convince Kawhi to come back for one extra season, because it'd be tough for him to leave an opportunity to play with Anthony Davis, I could really see the Toronto Raptors retaining him in the long term.
Well, it works both ways. I think Kawhi Leonard doesn't necessarily want to be the number one guy. Anthony Davis has been the number one guy since he arrived in New Orleans. And he's been performing at that level, and he's waited this long to demand for a trade, been comfortable in that role as the star player on that team. Yep. It's a fantastic situation where he could come in and take the reins on the Toronto Raptors. Kawhi Leonard doesn't need to be the number one guy. He just needs to play his game.
The face.
Exactly.
He might be the best player. But
Anthony Davis could be he could take the superstardom, right? Everything.
The spotlight off Kawhi.
Exactly, the spotlight off of Kawhi, and I think that would make Kawhi Leonard more comfortable as well, providing that extra push. It's a fair point, but I think also Anthony Davis is young, and I think the reason that the Lakers are being tossed out is because of the LeBron effect, and everybody wants to play with LeBron, and even if the team is absolute garbage, which the Lakers are, and I don't understand how people are convinced, they're worse than the Rockets, they're worse than the Thunder, they're worse than the Golden State Warriors, even with their entire team and LeBron James, they can't compete in a 7-game series with any of those teams. So you add in Anthony Davis, they're still not a championship team. I don't understand that train of thought, but there's just something about that market, that place to live, playing with LeBron. I think that's those factors. Yeah, he wants to contend, but you can't underrate any of those things. But what I would be more concerned about, we're going to switch completely tangentially here. I don't even know how to pronounce that word properly. But basically, what we're thinking here is there's players, and I'm using another comment here now, Alan. There's two teams that are the favorites, the Lakers, the Celtics. The Celtics obviously can't make any trade until the offseason, so they're kind of irrelevant right now. But New Orleans doesn't have to trade Anthony Davis, so they can hold on to him and wait until the offseason if, some sort of verbal agreement happens that they like. There's teams that the media is pushing, the Knicks, the Bulls, the Heat. Those guys, they can't offer anything. I mentioned about the Knicks the other day, but realistically, if you're the New Orleans Pelicans, and now you're losing your superstar player, you're going to try to rebuild around the guys, hopefully, that you're getting back, right?
Yep.
They're going to become integral parts of the team. Why are you going to pick a couple of Knicks players that have barely 10 wins on the season, Bulls that have barely 10 wins? It doesn't make any sense. The Raptors, the Bucks, that's the next biggest name out here.
Yep.
Basketball Forever, one of my favorite all NBA channels. They've now reported that the Milwaukee Bucks have made everybody tradable except Giannis Antetokounmpo, which makes sense. Same thing as the Raptors would be doing with Kawhi Leonard. This is what I see. Does this sound to you like a legitimate threat? A savory option? And let me give you a couple names before you comment. What I could see is Eric Bledsoe, Chris Middleton, Thon Maker, who already wants out, and then maybe another guy like maybe an Ersan Ilyasova, and then you can just sprinkle back in like an Antoine Moore coming back to the Bucks.
Yeah, so the Bucks are a very interesting team because you look on paper, Pascal Siakam is maybe our centerpiece, and Chris Middleton would probably have to be the player that you send back to the New Orleans Pelicans because he's their second best guy. Because if they're going to bring in Anthony Davis, they're not going to trade Giannis. So Chris Middleton's their second star over there, but the unfortunate thing for the Bucks is that they have a lot of players who are on expiring contracts. So the most valuable pieces that they can send over can leave the New Orleans Pelicans in the offseason. And they're trading Anthony Davis because he can leave 2 years from now, not this season but the season after. So I don't really see the Pelicans bringing back a lot of expiring contracts unless there's some picks involved, unless there's some young players, because a lot of the Bucks guys are win-now players. You mentioned it. Chris Middleton, Eric Bledsoe, those are two guys that could really help a championship team this season, in the next couple of years. They're not really rebuilding players. Thon Maker, we don't really know if Thon Maker's a young guy or an old guy, so we'll leave that for you guys to decide in the comment section. And there's a lot of expiring contracts and not very young upside players. Malcolm Brogdon's an intriguing piece, but he's kind of older for a rookie and doesn't really turn the bell like Pascal Siakam.
Well, Malcolm Brogdon's not a rookie.
But he was a rookie a couple years ago. I apologize if I said he was a rookie. He's a younger guy.
Yeah.
Been in the league for a short period of time. So I don't really see the Bucks being capable of making a trade that's as intriguing as maybe the Raptors or the Lakers, despite the fact that they have the current talent.
That's a fair assessment. And now another team, we switch over to the West. Two teams that I think would be really keen because of where they've been stuck position-wise in the Western Conference in a playoff spot and never been able to make the push, right, to get over that hump. One would be the Portland Trailblazers. Another would be the Spurs probably, but the Spurs definitely don't have pieces. Portland Trailblazers, can you see them making any serious offers? I don't really, because maybe Nurkic and C.J. McCollum, but now they're both on pretty big contracts. And that to me does not seem nearly as sweet a deal as with the Lakers or the Raptors or even the Celtics if they are to wait on those players.
Yeah, that'd be similar to what the Indiana Pacers did if with Paul George. Everyone would be kind of confused, but the Pelicans would have to be extremely high on C.J. McCollum in order to do that deal in the same vein that the Pacers were high on Victor Oladipo. Now, it worked out for the Pacers because Victor Oladipo turned into a star, and he didn't really show that in OKC or Orlando.
That's true.
But I don't really see that move going down for the Blazers. But one team that I do want to bring up, and I think is kind of sneaking around everyone, they're not really in the news, they're not really in the rumors, but the Houston Rockets offered 4 first-round picks for Jimmy Butler. They offered 4 first-round picks. If they could send a guy like Clint Capella and PJ Tucker and 4 first-round picks to the Pelicans, that could be a very interesting trade. And I see the Houston Rockets as a team that could possibly make a move like that.
You know, I actually really like that you brought that up. I had not even considered it. But if you look at this team, and we've said now before the podcast, we can honestly make a separate podcast on the other guys because now there's word coming out that with Anthony Davis wanting to leave, the New Orleans Pelicans are wanting to blow up their entire roster.
Yep.
It could be similar to the Washington Wizards case where they say that and really nothing happens, but there wasn't really a market for a lot of the Wizards players. But if they're looking to unload guys like Drew Holiday, Nikola Mirotic, just any of their players, these aren't old players. These aren't, they're players, but they won't get a lot of value back from them. So what are the New Orleans Pelicans looking to do after that? They're looking to rebuild. And what is a better piece to rebuild than 4 first-round picks? What's better to rebuild around a really good NBA center if you're losing a guy like Anthony Davis? I think that actually is a very considerable offer. Mm-hmm. But is it more... Because you're not going to have that impact right away, right? And you're not going to have the guarantee that the first-round picks will turn into anything. And the first-round picks aren't going to be consecutive. They're going to be spread out over X amount of years, right? Yep. Is that better than getting the immediate Pascal Siakam and OG and all these guys that start developing, or Kyle Kuzma and Lonzo Ball and everything, just to make it interesting that they're getting the players and build up the ticket sales kind of thing? I don't see that being the case. I think that they would probably go for the now, just because you need to consider how much is this going to affect ticket sales and stuff, which is a very important thing that GMs also need to consider, right?
Especially for the Pelicans.
That's exclusive of what I'm talking about, the Pelicans, right? They need to think about, what will happen to the fan base and how long will they have to wait before they can, nobody in the league wants to become the Bulls, right? Nobody wants to become the Bulls or the Knicks, so...
for sure.
But it's a really good point to consider.
Most definitely. It's really interesting to see what New Orleans could do. We could probably talk about this for hours on end. You mentioned there's a bunch of other players that are out there on New Orleans and throughout the league that are up for trade. So stay tuned to the Raptors Digest. We got a lot of possible trade scenarios coming out. People are... The news about Marc Gasol and Mike Conley came out a few days before this. We were planning on making a video on that. There's other trades you guys are sending us, so we're trying to make as much content as possible before the trade deadline. Riker mentioned the Collins segment coming up this weekend. We'll have more information coming about that soon. You guys are the best for making it this far. Check out the Twitter, the Instagram, all that cool stuff. Riker, any last words on Anthony Davis? Has he been traded yet since we've recorded this pod?
I hope he's been traded to the Raptors since this pod has been in editing mode and uploading mode.
For sure. Anyways, you guys are the best. Rock out.
Cheers.